This all happened to me about 2 months ago. I can still feel the cold dread, even now when I think about it. I work in construction, and after a long day, I usually stop at a corner store for something to eat and drink. On this particular evening, I finished work around 7 in the evening. The sun was already starting to dip below the buildings, casting long, strange shadows. I drove my old pickup truck towards the familiar glow of the convenience store sign. I wanted a cold soda and some of those sugary candies that always hit the spot after hours of hard physical labor. As I pulled into the parking lot, I noticed a dark sedan idling near the entrance. A man was just stepping out of the store, his head down, quickly moving towards that car. I barely glanced at him as I walked in. The store was quiet. I grabbed a large cola from the cooler and a couple of chocolate bars from the aisle. My mind was already drifting towards dinner and a hot shower. I went to the counter and paid for my items. The cashier, a young man I recognized, seemed a little preoccupied, staring out the window. I thought nothing of it. I took my receipt and the bag and headed out. The air was getting cooler, and a slight breeze rustled the leaves in the trees overhead. I was almost at my truck when I heard a voice call out. It was the cashier. He was standing just outside the store entrance, looking straight at me. He called again, his voice firm. He said that I had not paid for the items in my hand. I was completely taken aback. My brain struggled to process what he was saying. I replied, "What are you talking about? I just paid for them. You were right there." I held up my receipt. He shook his head and gestured with his arm. He told me to come back and pay, or he would call the police and have me arrested. My confusion turned to annoyance. I had just paid. I was holding the proof. As he spoke, I noticed something odd. He was not just pointing at me. His gaze kept flicking past me towards my truck. He was gesturing subtly, almost a twitch of his hand, towards the passenger side of my vehicle. Then, he started waving me over, a frantic motion. His eyes were wide with a strange urgency. My annoyance faded, replaced by a growing sense of unease. What was he trying to tell me? I walked back towards him, my mind racing. He turned and led me inside the store. His face was pale. Once we were inside, away from the open air, he leaned in closer. His voice was low, almost a whisper, but it carried a chilling weight. "There was someone inside your truck," he said. My heart skipped a beat. "When you were paying, I saw it on the security cameras. Someone was walking into your truck. They had a knife in their hand." His words hit me like a physical blow. I felt a sudden cold wave wash over me. I was absolutely stunned, my mind struggling to comprehend what he had just said. A person with a knife in my truck. I spun around and looked out the front window. My truck was right there in the parking lot, bathed in the dim light of the overhead lamps. I could see it clearly. The back passenger door of my truck, which I always kept closed and usually locked, was wide open. It gaped like a dark mouth. I started walking towards it, my steps heavy, my breath caught in my throat. I approached my truck cautiously, my eyes scanning the interior. There was no one inside. The seats were empty. My work jacket was still folded on the back seat where I had left it. There was no sign of anyone. The relief that flooded me was immense, but it was quickly replaced by a lingering terror. Where did they go? What were they doing? I considered calling the emergency services, but a strange reluctance held me back. I did not want to deal with a police report. I did not want to recount the story to officers, to fill out paperwork, to spend hours explaining what had just happened. Part of me just wanted to erase the whole incident from my mind and pretend it never happened. I just wanted to be home, safe. To this day, I have no idea what happened to the person who was about to get into my truck. I do not know what their plan was or what they intended to do if they had managed to hide inside. The thought makes my stomach clench even now. I am endlessly grateful to that cashier. His quick thinking, his decision to make a scene and draw me back into the store possibly saved my life. He saw something on the cameras that I was completely oblivious to. I drove home that night with the windows up and the doors locked, something I had often forgotten to do before. That night taught me a harsh lesson. I learned that danger can lurk in the most ordinary places, right when you least expect it. From that day forward, I have made it a strict habit. Every single time I get out of my vehicle, even for a moment, I make sure the doors are always locked. It is a small action, but it gives me a sense of security that I did not know I was missing. The image of that open door and the man with the knife will stay with me forever. This story happened a long time ago, in the cold of December 2007. It was a bitterly cold night, with a biting wind that cut right through my coat. I had just left a friend's Christmas party. The party had been a good time, full of warm laughter and festive cheer, but now I was heading back to my small apartment. My thoughts were on getting home, getting warm, and finally getting some rest. On my way back, a section of the freeway I needed to take was blocked. There was a sign for construction work, rerouting traffic, which was a frustrating surprise. This was before the days when everyone had a navigation system on their phone. My old mobile phone just had basic call and text features. I decided to pull into a nearby gas station. It was called Miller's Gas, and it looked a little rundown but functional. I planned to ask the clerk for directions to the next freeway entrance. I just wanted to get back on track and head home. As I started walking from my car towards the convenience store entrance, a young woman seemed to appear out of nowhere. One moment the path was clear, and the next, she was there, walking directly towards me. Just the sight of her sent a strange prickle of unease down my spine. She was wearing a very tattered black hooded sweatshirt underneath a thick, practical windbreaker. Her pants were baggy cargo trousers, dark and stained. Something about her posture, the way she moved, put me on edge instantly. I tried to avoid her. I turned my head away and picked up my pace, hoping to get into the store quickly and just bypass any interaction. I wanted to be in the brightly lit, safe space of the shop, but then I heard her voice. "Hey, wait," she called out. I pretended not to hear her, keeping my head down and continuing to walk at a rapid pace. My heart started to beat a little faster. She called out again, much louder this time. "Wait up." She waved her arms, a wide, sweeping gesture. At this point, it was impossible to ignore her without being overtly rude. I reluctantly turned to face her, my apprehension growing. As she got closer, I could see her face more clearly in the dim light of the gas station. She had a massive amount of makeup on, thick and smeared, which did little to hide her deeply sunken, bloodshot eyes. I will not lie, despite the disarray, her features were quite attractive. But somehow, that only made her more unsettling. It was a jarring contrast, an attractive face with something deeply wrong behind the eyes. Before she even spoke, a strong feeling washed over me. I just knew, with a gut certainty, that this was going to be trouble. I tried to sound firm, but my voice came out a little strained. "So, what do you want?" I asked her. She smiled, a wide, unnatural grin. "Yeah, so, I know I do not know you," she began, her voice a little too sweet. "But could you do me a huge favor? My car will not start, and I think the battery is dead. Can you jump-start my car? It is right over there." She pointed across the parking lot to a beat-up old sedan parked far away in the darker corner. It looked like it had been sitting there for a while. I immediately thought of an excuse. No, sorry," I told her. "I do not have any jump-starter cables in my car." It was a lie, but I just wanted to get away. "Oh," she said, her smile not faltering. "They sell those things here in the gas station. Why do you not buy some? And then you can help me." Her tone was still overly friendly, almost flirty. It was an uncomfortable attempt at charm. "I am sorry," I repeated, trying to maintain a polite but firm distance. "But I cannot help you." I started to turn away again, hoping she would finally get the hint and leave me alone. Instead, she grabbed my arm. Her grip was surprisingly strong. She pulled herself closer to me, invading my personal space. The smell of stale cigarettes mixed with cheap, strong perfume wafted off her. It was sickening. "Come on," she purred, her voice low. "A hot guy like you cannot help me out. You seem really cool. What is your name?" "I am Tiffany." She then brazenly put her arm around my waist, trying to press herself against me. Now, as a young, unattached man in my early 20s, normally an attractive woman showing interest in me would be a welcome thing. I will admit, for a fleeting moment, I was tempted by her initial approach. But there was something so incredibly off about this entire situation, a deeply unsettling vibe that screamed danger. This was not a normal encounter. I pushed her arm off my waist. "Look, I can't help you," I said, my voice sharper this time. "Ask someone else." I made an immediate decision. I needed to get away from this woman, and I needed to do it right now. I turned and started walking back towards my own car, deciding that I would just drive to another gas station, even if it meant being more lost. I would rather be lost than with her. Of course, she followed me. "Hey, come on," she called out, her voice now losing some of its artificial sweetness. "Do not walk away. Where's your Christmas spirit?" Her words sounded almost mocking. "I really want to get to know you. Come back to my car." She grabbed my arm again, her nails digging slightly into my skin. I shook her off harder this time, my irritation overriding my fear for a moment. I just kept walking, not looking back. I reached my car, quickly unlocked it, and opened the driver's side door. As I was getting in, she walked quickly to the passenger side of my vehicle. To my horror, she literally tried to open the door, tugging at the handle. She was trying to get inside my car. "Look, I told you. I cannot help you," I shouted at her, my voice strained with panic as I pulled myself into the driver's seat and slammed the door shut, locking it immediately. I fumbled with the keys, turning on the engine. She ran around to the driver's side window and started pounding on the glass. I wanted to drive away, to just peel out of the parking space, but she had positioned herself directly in front of the door. If I moved, I risked hitting her. I was trapped. I slowly rolled down my window, just a small crack, enough to speak, but not enough for her to reach in. My voice was low, filled with a desperate urgency. "Look, for the last time, I am not going to help you. Get the hell away from my car. Take a hike." Her demeanor changed instantly. The flirty, playful act vanished, replaced by an expression of pure, unadulterated anger and hostility. Her face contorted, and her eyes, already bloodshot, narrowed into slits of malice. "You freaking loser!" she shrieked, her voice venomous. "Like I would ever even let you touch me anyways. Screw you!" She then raised her foot and kicked my car door hard. I heard a sickening thud and felt the metal give slightly. Then she turned and ran back towards her own car, the one she claimed would not start. I was genuinely shocked by her sudden burst of violence. For a moment, I just sat there, my mind reeling. My first instinct was to get out of my car and call the police, to report her for assault and attempted entry into my vehicle. But then, to my horror, I looked over. I saw her climb into the passenger seat of the beat-up sedan, the same car she said had a dead battery. And then, from the deep shadows near the back of the building, another man emerged. He was tall, with a heavy build, and he moved with a predatory grace. He climbed into the driver's seat of the car. He was carrying something in his hand. It looked like a heavy ice scraper, or perhaps a long, thick wrench. My heart began to pound in my chest, a frantic drumbeat. I then heard the other car's engine fire up. It roared to life without a problem. She had been lying. Her car was perfectly fine. A chilling realization washed over me. This was not just a strange encounter with a desperate woman. This was a setup. I feared for my safety. There was no time to call the police now. One had to get out of there. My life felt like it was in immediate danger. I pulled out of that gas station parking lot faster than I have ever driven anywhere in my entire life. My tires squealed on the asphalt as I peeled out onto the main road, ignoring all traffic laws. I glanced into my rearview mirror. The other car, the beat-up sedan with the two of them inside, pulled out right after me. They were following. This was the beginning of what would become the most terrifying few minutes of driving I have ever experienced. I drove as fast as my car would go, trying to put as much distance as possible between my vehicle and theirs. They stayed in pursuit, their headlights a relentless glow behind me. I could hear their horn honking, a persistent, aggressive sound, as they tried to catch up. I took every turn I could, swerving through traffic, weaving around slower cars. My only thought was escape. I was approaching a traffic light that was just about to turn red. I saw my chance. I slowed down slightly, making it look like I was going to stop. The light turned from yellow to a bright, undeniable red. I waited a couple of agonizing seconds, just long enough for the traffic coming the other way to pause. And then I floored it. My car shot forward, right through the red light. I heard a few angry horns from the cross traffic, but I did not care. At that moment, my safety was all that mattered. I looked in my rearview mirror again. I could see the other car, their brake lights flaring bright red as they slammed to a halt at the intersection. They had missed the light. I continued to drive away as quickly as possible. I pulled into a nearby subdivision, a quiet residential area with winding roads and numerous houses. I took a few quick turns, driving deep into the neighborhood, trying to lose them in the maze of streets. Finally, I parked near a dark, unlit house, pulling into its shadow. I turned off my headlights and engine, plunging my car into complete darkness. I leaned back against the seat, taking a few shaky, gasping breaths. My heart was pounding, a frantic drum against my ribs. I could hardly sit still. My hands trembled on the steering wheel. I waited for several minutes, trying to calm my racing nerves. The silence of the suburban street was a stark contrast to the chaotic chase. I peered out into the darkness, listening, watching. After what felt like an eternity, I slowly started driving back the way I came, inching my way out of the neighborhood. When I reached the main road, there were no signs of the car that had been following me. It looked like I had lost them. A wave of immense relief washed over me, making my entire body feel weak. I eventually drove to a different gas station, a large, well-lit one further down the road. I went inside and asked the clerk for directions. I also decided to tell him what had just happened, describing the crazy couple and their ploy to lure people into a trap by claiming their car battery was dead. But he did not seem particularly interested. He just gave me a blank stare. I could not really blame him, though. I did not have much information to give him. I had never gotten a good look at their car's make or model, and I had certainly not seen their license plate. My only thought during the chase was survival. I safely made it back to my apartment building. As I got out of my car, I went to inspect the driver's side door. Thankfully, the dent that woman had made with her kick was not too severe. It was just a small, shallow mark, not too much damage. A physical reminder of a very real threat. Over a decade has passed since that night. Yet, that story remains one of the most frightening things that has ever happened to me. I will never forget the look of pure malice that the girl gave me when she shouted at me and kicked my door. My best guess is that she was involved in some kind of illicit activity. Perhaps a drug addict desperate for money, or something even worse. I really do not know. I have no idea who that other guy was, or what they truly intended on doing to me. I sometimes think to myself, what would have happened if I had let her seduce me into that trap? What if I had been less cautious, or more trusting? That very thought, even now, sends a cold shiver down my spine. It chills me to this day. So, to all of you out there, especially young men, pay attention to your instincts. Do not let attraction blind you to obvious red flags, especially if someone is aggressively coming on to you for no good reason. Trust your gut. And to Tiffany, and I really doubt that is your real name, you can rot in hell. You and that scumbag guy you were with. It has been nearly 13 years, but I still truly hope to never see either of you ever again. The memory of your faces, twisted with anger and malice, still haunts my thoughts. I worked a late shift at a gas station on the edge of town. It is usually pretty quiet after midnight, but sometimes you get some strange characters. This particular encounter happened a few months ago, around 3 in the morning. A young man, who looked to be about 25 years old, approached my service window. He was dressed remarkably well for the hour and for a gas station, especially this one. He had on a brand new red athletic sweater, fresh athletic shoes, and a new baseball cap. His face was freshly shaven, almost sparkling clean. He looked like he had just stepped out of a magazine, which immediately struck me as unusual. I slid open the window. He leaned in and asked me about a specific brand of energy drink that we do not typically carry in our store. I told him we did not have it. He looked incredibly dejected, his shoulders slumping. He just stood there for about 2 minutes without saying anything else, just staring blankly into the night. I am a pretty patient person. In my line of work, you deal with a lot of eccentric individuals, especially in the late hours. So, I just waited silently, watching him. After a long pause, he finally spoke again. His voice was quiet. "What should I do?" he asked. I was confused by the sudden vague question. About what?" I replied. He then started to tell me a story about how he had not eaten in like 2 days. He looked at me with wide, sad eyes and repeated his question. What should I do? I knew this trick. It is a common ploy for people trying to get free food or money. "Well," I said, trying to be helpful but also firm, "you could buy some food. Do you have any money?" He mumbled something. I have $2, but I really want an energy drink." We went back and forth like this for about a minute. He seemed fixated on the energy drink, even though he claimed to be starving. I finally suggested that he should probably go to the local shelter down the road. I told him they would give him free food and a warm place to rest. This was clearly not what he wanted to hear. His face fell again. Without another word, he suddenly turned and sprinted off into the darkness, disappearing quickly from my sight. I thought, man, that was super weird, and went back to cleaning the store. I figured that was the end of that strange interaction. About an hour later, the guy returned. I was busy wiping down the counter when I saw him approaching the window again. This time, he looked even stranger. Whatever he had taken, or whatever he was experiencing, had clearly hit him hard. He was swaying slightly as he walked. A car had followed him into the parking lot. It was a beat-up sedan, and a woman inside was speaking very loudly to him, though I could not quite make out her words. He was smiling and nodding at her, a wide, almost manic grin on his face. Then, as she drove off, he turned and approached my window, his grin still fixed in place. His eyes were shining with an unsettling intensity. I tried to keep my face neutral. "What can I get for you?" I asked, trying to sound as normal as possible. His reply was unexpected and eerie. "Your eyes," he said, his voice a little slurred but still clear. "They are green. Did you know that is a very rare gene to have?" I simply nodded and offered a polite smile. My eye color often attracts comments, but usually not like this. I knew better than to encourage a strange conversation at 3 in the morning. I just wanted to complete the transaction. He continued, undeterred by my silence. "It means you have light in your soul, rainbow light inside of you." He paused, his gaze fixed on my name tag. He then read my name aloud. "Your name contains the name of Wrath from the sun god in Egyptian culture. You are a part of creation in the universe." I frowned slightly, not saying anything back. Wearing a name tag often elicits weird comments from customers, but this was a new level of bizarre. I kept my expression blank, hoping he would move on to what he wanted to buy. He continued his strange monologue. "I have a very special $2 bill and 3/4, he announced, holding up the money. "That, if invested correctly, will be worth a lot of money. I will pay with these. You need to keep them and then use them to make money." He then proceeded to put the 3/4, the $2 bill, and a small 30 Pinecone into the payment box on the counter. I stared at the Pinecone, utterly baffled. My mind raced. How strange it was. And he expected me to do something with this money? It was the gas station's money, not mine. And he put a freaking Pinecone in the box. I picked up the items, trying to sound professional. "What do you want to buy?" I asked. I quickly calculated what he could afford with the $2.75 he had given me. "You can buy a bottle of water, some chocolate, and a tea," I suggested. "That would fix your issue of wanting to eat, get some caffeine, and stay hydrated." I hoped this practical suggestion would bring him back to reality. He seemed to consider my words, then his wide smile returned. "Yes," he agreed. "That sounds good." He seemed genuinely grateful for my suggestions. As I got his items ready, he continued to smile brightly at me through the window, his eyes still fixed on mine. I felt thoroughly stressed out by the intense, unwanted eye contact the entire time. It was deeply unsettling. While I was cashing out the transaction, he suddenly turned and ran to the gas pumps. He then stood there, staring intently at the ceiling of the pump canopy. This went on for a good 3 minutes or so. He was completely still, just looking up into the metal and lights. He then turned around slowly and came back to the window. I handed him his items and his change. As I did, he started speaking again, telling me more about the love and light in the universe. Then he paused, looked at the coins in his hand, and asked me why I had given him the coins back. I had to explain to him again, patiently, that I could not keep the money. It was against company policy to keep a customer's change. It was not the exact same coins he gave me, but it was his change. He looked at me, his smile fading slightly, then his eyes seemed to lose focus again. Without another word, he suddenly bolted. He ran off in the direction of the highway that was right in front of my work, clutching his items. He disappeared right into the darkness, as quickly as he had come and gone before. That was definitely one of the weirdest and most creepy encounters I have had yet in this job. I still think about that man, his strange words, and the unsettling intensity in his green eyes. I wonder what happened to him, and if he ever found his rainbow light. This happened to me just last Christmas, a night that started with so much excitement and ended with pure terror. For the holiday season, I had 3 different house parties to attend. I wanted to see everyone, so I carefully planned my time, splitting it between each gathering. Because it was Christmas, I really wanted to look my best. I spent a long time getting ready, putting on my best makeup, and choosing a pretty, festive dress. I would say I am fairly attractive, and perhaps that night with the makeup and the dress, I overdid it a little. I spent the first part of the day with my family. It was a wonderful time, full of good food and laughter. Then I drove to my best friend's house party. Her family is a lot like mine, and we had a truly great time, sharing stories and holiday cheer. I ended up staying there a lot longer than I originally planned, and I only left right as it was getting dark, the streetlights just beginning to flicker on. My next stop was my boyfriend's family's party. It was a little further away, and as I was driving, I noticed my fuel gauge was dipping dangerously low. I had to make a decision. Should I stop for gas now and be even later for the party, or risk running out later that night? I decided to get gas then. I knew I would be leaving his house pretty late, probably well past midnight, and I definitely did not want to be getting gas by myself in the dark, in the quiet hours. That thought made me uneasy. I normally do not like going to the gas station I was approaching. It is in a part of town where I have been subjected to unwanted comments and catcalls more times than I can count. As I pulled into the last pump at the far end of the station, a familiar sense of dread settled in my stomach. And what do you know, almost the very second I stepped out of my car, I heard it. A man's voice, loud and clear, from a car parked a few pumps down. "Hey, sexy, you got a really nice body." I just did that half-smile, awkward acknowledgement of women often perfect in these situations. It was a reflex, an attempt to appease without inviting more attention. This was mere seconds after getting out of my car. I was standing at the pump, trying to insert my card, but for some strange reason, it was not working. The screen kept flashing a message about not reading my card, some kind of issue. I kept trying, swiping it again and again, because all I wanted was to get the hell out of there. The longer I stood there, the more exposed I felt. During this whole struggle, I got catcalled 2 more times. Guys in cars, hanging out of their windows, shouting things as they drove by or sat idling. I was really starting to freak out at this point. My hands were shaking as I tried to swipe my card. Then, a serious junk car pulled up at the pump right next to me. This was not just an old car. It was barely held together. It did not even have a whole door on the passenger side. It looked like some sort of bungee cord was holding what was left of it in place. A bad vibe radiated from it. I immediately decided I was not going to stand outside any longer. I was going inside to pay for my gas with the teller. I pulled my card out of the non-working pump and started walking quickly towards the convenience store entrance. The man driving the junk car also got out, and he was walking inside as well. I could feel him getting way too close behind me. My skin crawled. So, once I reached the door, I opened it wide and stepped aside, letting him go first. I pretended I was just holding the door for him, but in reality, I just did not want him to be directly behind me as I walked into the confined space of the store. As he walked past, he started saying something about how sweet I was for holding the door. It was just getting really creepy. I could smell something strong and unpleasant on him, and his eyes were sunken and glazed. He looked like he was heavily involved in drug use. The way he was staring at me, a lingering, hungry gaze, just really made my stomach turn. He looked to be about my age, which was 21, in case I had not mentioned it before. I walked to the line, which was a little long, and waited. I was getting lingering stares from other people in the store, but that did not bother me as much as the catcalls and the junkie man's presence. I just wanted to pay and leave. Once I finally got to the cashier, he then said, "Oh, I cannot give you gas." I was utterly exasperated. Why the hell not? I asked, my voice sharp with impatience. He then started making some flimsy excuse about why he could not sell to Bronco fans. My purse was a Broncos purse, clearly visible. I just stared at him. "Dude," I said, trying to contain my frustration, "I am trying to get the hell out of here. Hurry up." I gave him a dirty enough look, a glare that clearly conveyed my extreme annoyance for him to finally start ringing me up. But then he started trying to talk to me about random, unimportant things. Stuff that I do not even care about enough to remember now, just trying to stretch out the interaction. I felt like I was being held hostage by the cashier and by the general creepy atmosphere of the place. As I was finally walking back to my car, I was already bracing myself for more catcalls. I heard another one from what was now like the sixth guy to bother me that night. My frustration was boiling over. But here is where I got the most scared. The junkie car guy was right behind me, walking out of the station at the same time. He walked up to his car, and he stood there for about a minute, seemingly doing nothing. I finally started pumping gas, trying to ignore him, trying to finish as quickly as possible. That is when I then heard a car door close, a heavy, metallic sound. I looked up. The junkie car guy and a second guy then got out of the car with him. Now, the second guy looked much scarier than the first. He was bigger, with a harder, colder expression on his face. He just started staring at me, his eyes raking me up and down. He was being incredibly creepy, his gaze lingering. My heart literally started pounding right now, just remembering this part. He started walking up to me, rounding the pump, his steps deliberate and menacing. I felt a surge of pure terror. I was trapped. At that exact moment, I heard some guy behind me in a white van, catcalling me yet again. His voice was loud, saying some really perverted things. He was clearly distracted, leaning out his window, looking at me as he rounded the corner of the building. Then, with a sickening crunch, he crashed right into a Mustang head-on. The sound of the collision was deafening, metal screeching and tearing. Junk car guy number 2 literally jumped back, startled by the unexpected noise and sudden impact. I took about a second to process what the hell had just happened. My mind registered the crash, the sudden diversion, the moment of opportunity. I slammed the gas pump handle back into its holder, stopping the flow of fuel, and jumped into my car as fast as humanly possible. I threw it into reverse, peeled out of the parking space, and reversed the hell out of there. The two really creepy junkie car guys were screaming in laughter now. Their faces were twisted in a strange maniacal glee as they pointed and yelled at me. "Look at what you did. You just made him crash. Look what you did." They were literally laughing as I sped away, as if I had orchestrated the entire thing. I reversed the hell out of there, just like they do in the movies, tires squealing. I literally had to stop the gas at like $4 worth because I did not want to stay there even for a second longer. My life felt more important than a full tank of fuel. I do not even know how to explain how I felt. It was like I was shaking and crying, but also laughing at the same time, a hysterical, disbelieving laugh. I actually had to scream in my car just to get rid of this overwhelming feeling, a release of pure, raw terror and adrenaline. The thing that shocked me the most is that the gas station was packed with people, yet these men had absolutely no shame in catcalling me like that, in broad view of everyone. This area I was in does not even have a lot of crime, which made the whole experience even more bewildering. I really do not understand how this even happened in the first place, or why these men felt so emboldened. I called my dad right away, still shaking. I could not even tell him the full story at first. I was just laughing like a maniac because it just felt so surreal, so utterly unbelievable that it had just happened to me. After that whole terrifying ordeal, my boyfriend always goes with me now to get gas there if he knows that I'm getting gas close to him. He will always drive to the parking lot to make sure I'm okay, watching from a distance until I'm safely back in my car. I have never gone back to that specific gas station again, and I have never worn that dress since. It is a symbol of a night I wish I could forget. I was 19 years old when this happened to me, and I am 23 now. At the time, I worked at a dog care facility, which was a job I loved. Murphy's Gas was the closest station on my way home, so it was my usual stop. I was driving a really old pickup truck back then. It was a dependable vehicle for work, but you could not entirely trust the fuel gauge on it. It often fluctuated, making it hard to know exactly how much gas was left. That day, the needle was hovering dangerously close to empty, so I knew I had to fill up. I pulled up to the pump, inserted my card, and started pumping fuel. The distinct smell of gasoline filled the air. I was just standing there, holding the nozzle, watching the numbers climb, when this really tall man came around the back of my truck. He seemed to appear out of nowhere. He started talking to me. Normally, I am fine with polite conversation, but his sudden presence, without any warning, immediately put me on edge. He just stepped right up. Before I could even process his words, he did something completely unexpected and incredibly unsettling. He proceeded to take the nozzle right out of my hand. My fingers were still wrapped around it, and he just slid his hand over mine, gently but firmly, and took control of the pump. He then started pumping my gas for me. In my opinion, this was incredibly odd and a huge boundary violation. Who just takes something out of someone else's hand without asking, especially at a gas station? He then went on to ask me what I was doing pumping my own gas. His tone was strangely paternal, almost like he was questioning my competence. I proceeded to tell him, as kindly but firmly as I could, that I was an adult. I explained that I did not really need anyone to do it for me, that I was perfectly capable of handling it myself. He ignored my subtle hint. Then he asked if I had a boyfriend. My stomach clenched. I said that I did, which was the truth, but in my head, I was screaming how badly I wished he was there right at that moment. His presence would have been a shield. He looked around the empty parking lot, his eyes scanning the area. Then he said, his voice laced with an unnerving curiosity, "Well, where is he at? I do not see him here." At this point, I was starting to mentally freak out. My heart began to pound against my ribs. I knew I needed to assert myself, to get him to leave without escalating the situation. "Sir," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "just because we are young does not mean we do not have to work every day. Just like you. My boyfriend cannot be with me 24/7 because we are both really busy trying to afford a place to live. We have responsibilities." The man stopped pumping my gas at that point. He looked at me for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then, surprisingly, he said, "You are right." A wave of relief washed over me. I thought he was finally going to leave. But then he added, his voice still too calm, "Well, have a good day. I really cannot wait to bump into you again." His words were delivered with a strange, lingering smile that sent a shiver down my spine. It was not a pleasant goodbye. It was a veiled threat, a promise of future encounters that I desperately did not want. I finished pumping my gas as quickly as my trembling hands would allow. I put the nozzle back, grabbed my receipt, and got the hell out of there. I drove away from Murphy's Gas as fast as I could, not looking back. I always carried 2 knives on me at all times for personal protection, tucked away where I can easily reach them. I even have a larger utility knife in my truck's trunk, just in case. It is a habit I developed from living alone and being aware of my surroundings. That day, I regretted not having one of them in my hand. I just want to add that I do understand the concept of being a gentleman and wanting to help someone out. There is nothing wrong with offering assistance, but putting your hand on the nozzle to my pump while my hand was still there without a single word of permission, that is just not cool. That is a violation of personal space and autonomy. Always ask first. If they say it is okay, then fine. But do not just do it and then try to engage in creepy conversation, questioning why their boyfriend is not around all the time. That is simply inappropriate and terrifying. So yeah, that whole encounter was a little creepy for me, to say the least. I have not seen him since that day, thankfully. I also do not drive that same truck anymore, so it is less likely he would recognize me if he ever did see me again. But now, I always make sure I have someone with me whenever I go to that particular gas station. I refuse to be alone there again. That lingering sense of unease, that promise of bumping into you again, stays with me. To start off this story, I just want to say that it happened a while ago, so please bear with me. My name is Leo. I am currently about 14 years old at the time of writing this, but this frightening incident happened to my parents about 3 years ago when I was around 11. It was the month of May, and one night, my parents and I had just finished unpacking our luggage. It was the beginning of our summer vacation, and we had decided to spend it in my mom's hometown in Mexico. We were staying in a small house that belonged to my grandmother. Now, this area in Mexico has a reputation for a lot of bad things. There are countless stories of cartels, drug deals, and infamous drug lords. It is a place known for its dark underbelly. However, it is important to note that the crime rate was not as high as it used to be. Things had quieted down a bit, but when incidents did happen, they usually did not end well. You would hear stories of blood splatter or multiple knife wounds. But hey, even with that unsettling reputation, it was still a pretty beautiful place during the day. There were many attractions, bustling markets, and ancient sites. We had just come from pretty far away, a long, exhausting drive. So we were too tired on arrival to check out the plaza or even the little street shops at the time. But that is not too relevant to this story. Let us cut forward about a week later. My uncle and aunt from my dad's side of the family had called him. They wanted to arrange a visit since we were staying relatively close to them now. Remember when I said that we live far away? Yeah, I was not kidding about that. We live all the way in California, and we had traveled by car, which is about a 2-day journey on the road. Of course, my dad took some breaks, splitting the drive over a couple of days, so the journey was not as heavy or continuous. Nevertheless, it was still one hell of a ride. Because of this distance, many of the family members on my dad's side cannot even visit us. Either they do not have the time off work, or it is just way too far away to justify the travel. As you can probably guess, my dad, being the really kind and family-oriented person that he is, immediately said yes to the opportunity. He was excited, mainly because of the reasons I just mentioned. This kind of bothered me though, because it was my least favorite uncle and aunt. I mean, literally my least favorite. They were the ones who constantly bossed you around, telling you to bring them this or that, and always forced you to do favors that you absolutely did not want to do. As you can imagine, it was absolutely hell during those 2 weeks that they stayed with us at my grandmother's house. Every day felt like an eternity of chores and demands. But when the day finally came for them to leave, there was a snag. They had accidentally missed their bus, the one that was supposed to take them back to their city. It was a small town, and bus schedules were not frequent. So, my dad, being the genuinely kind and accommodating person that he is, offered to give them a ride back to their city. Their city was about 5 hours away from where we were staying. I did not go with them. Thankfully, I stayed with my grandma, enjoying the peace and quiet. However, my mom did go, which meant I would be alone with grandma for the night. My dad later explained that the initial part of the ride was pretty chill and smooth. He was actually quite pumped up that night from the 2 energy drinks he had consumed before the drive. He felt wide awake and alert, so nothing really bothered him. That is, until about 4 hours into the drive, when they were almost arriving into the city of Alta Sierra. My mom, who was sitting in the passenger seat, had started to notice something strange up ahead. She saw about 3 men standing right in the middle of the road, visible by a glimmer of light, perhaps from a distant street lamp or a passing car. Thinking they were army men, who typically set up checkpoints to check for unusual activity, especially in those regions, my mom told my dad to start slowing down. They often had booths set up to screen vehicles. As they began to slow down, both my parents started to notice something unsettling. The men did not have any army suits or uniforms. There was nothing on them that represented a government official, not even a badge. They just looked like regular men, standing in the middle of the road in the dark. Upon seeing this, my dad immediately sped up again. His first assumption was that it was just a couple of drunk guys hanging out from one of the 2 houses that were situated on the side of the road. He tried to dismiss it, to rationalize it. Well, that assumption was soon erased. Those same 3 men, instead of getting out of the way or ignoring them, suddenly chased after their car. They started running, sprinting towards the vehicle as it accelerated. That is when things got real. My dad, now fully realizing the danger, absolutely floored it. He cranked up the manual transmission all the way, pushing the car to its absolute limit. My mom and uncle were totally frozen with fear, like bricks, when they then noticed an object fly through the air towards their car. That same object was a heavy metal ball, hurtling towards them at incredible speed. It hit the front windshield of the car with a sickening thud, almost shattering it upon impact. The glass spider webbed immediately, making it hard to see. Now, the car that my dad was driving was not really the strongest vehicle. It was a 2009 Volkswagen Jetta with a known defective windshield. My dad actually had to get that windshield fixed multiple times before, even including one time where a simple stick hit it while driving on a rural road. Can you believe that? A freaking stick. Anyways, my mom, seeing the metal ball hit the windshield, totally flipped. She started panicking, screaming in the car, terrified. My dad got into a state of shock, his adrenaline surging. Before he knew it, he was pushing the car to an insane speed, around 160 miles per hour on those dark, unlit Mexican roads. Because of this reckless speed, one of the tires ended up popping. They hit a ditch that they also miraculously passed through without flipping over, a narrow escape, all while heading towards the exit to go to the city. The tire exploded with a loud bang, but my dad kept driving on the rim, desperate to escape. My dad did not slow down until he finally reached the safety of the city limits, pulling off the main road. Even so, after they got to my aunt and uncle's home, where they were supposed to drop them off, all my dad could muster was a shaken. What the hell just happened? My aunt, noticing their shocked expressions, the shattered windshield, and the deflated tire, immediately offered to let my dad and my mom stay the night. It was obviously the best and safest choice at the time. They both agreed, too exhausted and shaken to argue. First thing in the morning, my dad immediately got the windshield and the tire fixed. He did not waste any time. So, I guess that was that. Apart from the nightmares my parents had for weeks afterward, nothing else has happened since then. Everything resumed back to normal. My parents do not talk about it much, but I know it deeply affected them. But if there is one piece of advice I could ever give you, it is this. Never, and I mean ever, go to Mexico cities during the night. It is way less risky that way, and much less common for you to get jumped or robbed. Just do not do it. Stay safe, This happened back in 2008. My girlfriend and I were taking a vacation to Ocean City, Maryland, a trip we had planned for months. We live in north central Pennsylvania, so it is at least a 6-hour drive, according to our meticulously printed directions from MapQuest. This was, of course, before the days of widespread GPS navigators on phones. We were making good time, enjoying the drive, when we were approaching what the MapQuest directions indicated as Route 1. It seemed to come up sooner than my girlfriend thought it should. She looked at the paper map, then at the road signs. She told me that it was not the right route, and that the correct turn would be up ahead, further down the road. However, I was being incredibly stubborn that day. I was convinced my printed directions were infallible. I told her she was wrong and took the exit to get on Route 1 anyway. That was a really big mistake, and I still wish that I had listened to her from the very beginning. My stubbornness led us into a terrifying situation. We ended up in Baltimore, in a rundown, unfamiliar section of the city. The buildings were dilapidated, and the streets were grimy. The atmosphere immediately felt unsafe. There was a man riding a bicycle real fast, weaving through traffic, who almost hit our car. He then, for some odd reason, seemed to be shouting at us as he sped past, his words indistinct but aggressive. A wave of unease washed over me. Then, we went through a street where a really small child, no older than 5 or 6, was playing with a fire hydrant that was gushing water into the street. I started to slow down as soon as I saw him, worried about hitting him. The child stopped playing with the hydrant for a moment and motioned for me to go forward, waving his hand. Just as I did, starting to accelerate slightly, that is when he began playing with the hydrant yet again. A powerful stream of water shot out of the gushing hydrant, directly at the front of my car. It felt like I was getting a car wash, but without my consent. The water was icy cold and splashed all over the windshield, momentarily blinding me. There were others nearby when this occurred. People standing on the sidewalks and in doorways, but no one seemed to even react. No one seemed to think anything of what this little boy just did to a passerby in a vehicle. It was as if it was a normal occurrence. As soon as I was done using my wipers to clear the water from the windshield, I continued on. I knew instinctively that it was probably better not to say anything or to stop. Getting involved might just lead to more trouble or worse. The silence of the bystanders was chilling. By this point, I was starting to get really nervous. The streets were getting narrower, the buildings more imposing, and I had no idea where we were going. I had no idea how to get to the beach from here, or how to get out of this part of the city. My girlfriend was visibly upset, her face pale. I came up to a red light, and there was this disheveled woman, clearly homeless, who came up to my window. She was tapping on the glass, asking if she could have a sandwich. My girlfriend was becoming hysterical by this point, whispering for me to just ignore her, to not open the window. I decided to ignore the woman who was obviously homeless. I kept my eyes fixed on the traffic light, willing it to turn green. Once the light finally changed, we continued on, leaving the woman behind. I was getting really frustrated. The trip was turning into a nightmare. I decided to call home, hoping to reach one of my parents for help. Maybe they could help navigate me to the right direction from here, using a proper map or an internet search. My brother answered the phone. He immediately sensed that I was worried, my voice tight with stress. He tried his best to help us, pulling up directions on his computer. But unfortunately, with his instructions and my confusion about where we even were, we were still pretty lost. The directions he was giving made no sense to my current surroundings. We eventually went through a toll booth, which surprisingly was on the way toward Interstate 95. I saw it as a desperate chance for help. I asked the employee operators for directions, hoping they would be able to guide us. They spoke them so fast, however, rattling off street names and turns, that I was not able to get everything down. My mind was reeling, and I could not retain all the information. This was just totally not turning out to be our day. Everything that could go wrong seemed to be happening. Somehow, through a series of desperate turns and sheer luck, I managed to backtrack. I drove for what felt like an eternity, turning down unfamiliar streets until, to my dismay, we ended up going for that awful part of the city again. I recognized the dilapidated buildings, the narrow streets, and even the intersection where the child was playing. It was a terrifying feeling of being trapped in a loop. But then, miraculously, after another series of confusing turns, we found a familiar road. We were back on our correct route, heading in the right direction. The relief was immense, like a heavy weight had been lifted from my shoulders. We finally managed to get to Ocean City without any further incident. It was late by then, well into nightfall. We had lost about 2 hours of drive time due to the wrong turn and the subsequent confusion. But thankfully, we were safe. We checked into our hotel and enjoyed the rest of our vacation time, trying our best to forget the harrowing experience of the drive. The drive home went much smoother. We stuck strictly to the main highways and avoided any potential shortcuts or unfamiliar routes. This had to have been one of the worst and most frightening experiences I have ever had while going on vacation. I definitely learned a valuable lesson that day. I learned to follow the directions as indicated, precisely whenever I go anywhere unfamiliar. And I learned to not ever take any shortcuts unless I absolutely know where I am going and have planned the route thoroughly. And I really advise you to do the same. Do not let your stubbornness or desire for a shortcut lead you into danger. Always be careful and aware of your surroundings, especially in unfamiliar places. My uncle, who I will now refer to as Eric, once told me a truly horrifying story about him and his wife, Jessica, when they were on their honeymoon about 2 decades ago. It was a tale that still makes their stomachs turn to this day. They had driven a long way to reach their destination, a charming coastal town known for its beautiful sunsets. They had rented a room at what looked like a nice older establishment called the Grand Vista Hotel for the night. They checked in late, tired but excited to start their new life together. Once they were in their room and about to settle down for the night, a strange, unpleasant odor started to become noticeable. It was faint at first, but it grew stronger, a weird, cloying smell that Eric could not quite place. He tried to ignore it, thinking it was just the old building. Then, when they finally lay down, the bed felt incredibly squishy. Not just soft, but unevenly soft, almost like there was something unusual beneath the mattress. It was uncomfortable and deeply unsettling. Eric, already feeling uneasy from the smell and the strange bed, called the person in charge of the lobby. He was polite but firm, explaining the weird odor and the odd feel of the bed. He requested someone to clean their room thoroughly early in the morning, hoping that would solve the problem. The person on the phone assured him it would be taken care of. Despite his wife, Jessica, already falling asleep beside him, Eric was having trouble drifting off. The smell seemed to be getting stronger, and the strange feel of the mattress kept him awake. He tossed and turned for a long time. Eventually, he decided he could not sleep in the bed. He got up, grabbed an extra blanket from the closet, and decided to sleep on the floor near the window, hoping the fresh air would help. He heard nothing more from the lobby that night. The very next morning, Eric and Jessica went down to the lobby. They were both tired, but Eric was particularly bothered by the lingering smell. He requested to speak with a manager immediately. Once the person in charge in the lobby finally called their manager, Eric explained the situation. He told them that the room had smelled really weird all night, and he would really like a new one, if possible. He tried to be reasonable, but his frustration was evident. The manager, a portly man with a tired expression, told Eric that all of the rooms were currently occupied. He apologized, but said he would definitely send a janitor up to clean out the room thoroughly while they were out for the day. Eric, feeling he had no other option, reluctantly agreed with this. He and Jessica then headed out to go spend the day together, exploring the town and trying to forget the unpleasantness of the night. They had a pleasant day, walking along the beach and visiting some local shops. As it was getting a little late, the sun beginning to set, they headed back to their room at the Grand Vista Hotel. Eric was hopeful that the cleaning crew had done their job and the room would be fresh and clean. When they entered the room, Jessica immediately said she was going to take a shower. Eric said okay, and while she went into the bathroom, he decided to make a phone call to his family. He was on the phone, recounting their day, when it hit him again. That same nasty odor, distinct and stronger now, was back. It filled the air, making him gag slightly. He was incredibly frustrated. They had been promised a clean room, and it smelled worse than before. He wanted to find out exactly where that odor was coming from. He thought maybe it was in the cabinet, or under the sink, or perhaps something spilled. So, he decided to check all the furniture, the drawers, and everything else in the room. That is when he then got near the bed. As he approached it, the odor became overwhelming. It was incredibly strong, a sickly sweet and decaying smell that made him feel nauseous. He knew it was coming from the bed itself. With a deep breath, he pulled back the covers. Then, he lifted the first mattress off the box spring. To his horror, what he saw underneath made him scream. His voice was raw, a sound of pure terror and disbelief. That is when he then saw it. There had been a dead body underneath the mattress that entire time. It was a man, and he looked around his late 30s. His skin was discolored, and the smell was horrific. They had been sleeping on a corpse. Eric immediately grabbed the foam from the room, his hands trembling. He stumbled backward, his mind reeling, and locked himself in the bathroom, where his wife Jessica was taking a shower. He slammed the door shut and bolted it. That is when Jessica, startled by his scream and the sudden commotion, asked him through the shower curtain if everything was okay. She asked why he was screaming so loudly. Right at that very moment, my Uncle Eric passed out. The shock, the horror, the overwhelming smell. It was too much for him. He collapsed onto the bathroom floor. Jessica, hearing the thud and the silence, immediately turned off the shower. She had to get out, dripping wet, and see what was happening. When she saw Eric unconscious on the floor, she immediately called emergency services. Eric had to go to the hospital. The paramedics checked him over, and thankfully, he ended up being okay, just suffering from severe shock and emotional trauma. The police were already at the hotel when he arrived at the hospital. They were questioning the staff, trying to piece together what had happened. They secured the room as a crime scene, but to this day, they never found the murderer. The case went cold. It still really makes them sick to their stomach thinking of how they slept on a dead body. The thought of lying on top of a decomposing corpse for hours unknowingly is a nightmare that stays with them. That is pretty much the end of it. Eric and Jessica, after getting Eric discharged from the hospital, eventually just went straight to their home. They decided to call it a night, canceling the rest of their honeymoon plans. They were too shaken to continue. They never heard back from the police regarding the case. To this day, they still have no idea who was responsible for the body or why it was left in their hotel room. The mystery of it and the sheer horror of their discovery remains with them always. While vacationing in Hawaii, on the beautiful island of Oahu, I witnessed what seemed to be a terrifying crime in progress. It was an experience that left me shaken and wondering about the hidden dangers beneath paradise. My husband and I went to Oahu for a 6-day trip in November of 2019. For the most part, we had a truly marvelous time. We enjoyed the humid tropical weather, swam in the incredibly clear waters, and embarked on challenging hikes up lush volcanic mountains. Every sight was a picture of paradise. Of course, I thought the trip would almost be ruined because I came down with a pretty bad 24-hour flu on our second day there. I was achy, feverish, and felt a general uneasiness settle over me. It was during this onset of sickness that I saw the terrifying sight that would forever change my perception of that beautiful island. It was mid-afternoon. We were actually in Honolulu, the bustling capital, having just finished a trip to the Diamond Head Crater Park. The hike had been strenuous, and by the time we had left, I was really feeling awful. The symptoms of the flu were hitting me hard. My body ached, a fever was making me shiver despite the heat, and a profound lethargy had settled over me. We decided to stop at one of the 7-Eleven gas stations in Honolulu. My husband wanted to get some cold drinks to rehydrate, and I desperately needed some medication to alleviate my symptoms. The gas station was situated next to a one-way street, busy with traffic. Our rented Jeep was parked parallel to the street, some 100 feet away from the store entrance. I sat in the Jeep, my head resting against the window, feeling miserable. I just wished that this stupid flu would just go away so that I could enjoy the rest of my vacation. It was incredibly hot and humid outside, so the windows of the Jeep were down. This meant I could hear all the noises of the traffic, the distant chatter of passers-by, and the general hum of the city. As I had started to wallow in the misery of my sickness, feeling sorry for myself, I then heard some yelling from right outside to my left. It was loud and angry. I immediately looked up, my eyes scanning the area around me, trying to pinpoint where the noise was coming from. When I looked over to the busy street, I then saw something that would absolutely shock me to my core. It was a dark gray sedan, idling at the red stoplight, just a few car lengths ahead of us. A woman was trying desperately to jump out of the car's passenger side. The door was wide open, her legs and feet flailing wildly in mid-air as she struggled to untangle herself from her seatbelt. She was clearly trying to escape. A man wearing a really dark shirt and sporting a goatee then yelled loudly. He reached across the seat and forcefully pulled her towards him, back into the car. I saw her scream, a silent, desperate cry, as she tried to fight him off, pushing him away with all her strength. One of her flip-flop shoes fell off in the process, landing on the street with a soft slap. He still pulled her back in, ignoring her struggles. He yelled something back at her, his voice harsh and furious. You need to understand that this entire incident, and what I did next, occurred in a matter of about 15 or 20 seconds. But in that moment, it felt like time slowed down, stretching out the horrifying scene before my eyes. Upon seeing this unfold right before me, I had then concluded, with a rising sense of horror, that this woman was being kidnapped. In that split second, something inside of me just came alive, overriding my illness and fear. Adrenaline coursed through my veins. I practically leaped out of the Jeep, my mind fixed on one goal: to grab her and help her get out. Anything I could do to help her, I was determined to do. I sprinted across the gas station lot and into the street toward the sedan at top speed, gaining ground quickly. But at this point, the man had yanked her fully into the car. He slammed the passenger door shut really quickly, with a final sickening thud. The light had turned green, and the sedan sped off, tires screeching, leaving me behind. I ran after it for a few more desperate seconds, but I was no match for its speed. It quickly turned around the corner, a block away, and vanished from sight. Unable to keep up with the car, I slowed to a stop, gasping for breath. I stumbled onto the sidewalk, my eyes darting around, desperate to see if anyone else had noticed what I had just witnessed. A couple, about 10 feet to my right, were standing there, their faces puzzled. They had clearly seen the whole thing go down, staring after the rapidly disappearing vehicle. No longer did I feel lethargic with illness. Now, adrenaline was pumping wildly through me, intermixed with a potent cocktail of fear and panic for this woman. What if she had been snatched off the street? What if this was the last time anyone ever saw her alive? The thoughts were unbearable. I then looked around frantically to see if anyone had begun to call the police, or if there were any conversations about what had happened. There was nothing. I asked the couple near me if they had called the emergency services. They had not. So, I ran back to the Jeep, fumbling for my phone, and immediately called emergency services. I am sure that I sounded panicked and distraught as I relayed what I saw to the dispatcher. My voice was probably trembling. The dispatcher, however, remained unusually calm. She calmly mentioned that they had already received a call about that same sedan and that someone was on their way. She then abruptly hung up on me. A few minutes later, my husband returned to the Jeep, his arms full of drinks and my medication. That is when I told him everything that happened, still speaking rapidly, my heart still racing. He looked shocked. As I was speaking, another woman, a patron who had been at the same gas station, came up to our Jeep. She looked just as concerned as I felt. She then showed me that she had actually recorded that whole incident on her phone. She had captured the horrifying scene. We ended up calling the police yet again, giving them the new information about the video. A female police officer showed up about 10 minutes later. She was calm, almost unnervingly so. The other young woman explained about the video, and I told the officer in detail what I had witnessed. I even gave her the first 3 letters of the license plate number that I had managed to catch, and told her where the car had turned. I recounted every detail I could remember about the struggle. The female officer remained unusually calm and almost nonchalant about it, just like the dispatcher. She told me that the police had already received multiple calls about the sedan and the couple arguing inside of it. She went on to say that the couple was just beefing, that basically they were just arguing loudly and causing a scene while driving around Honolulu. I stood there, absolutely shocked at what I heard. That terrifying scene of a woman desperately trying to escape, her shoes falling off, her screams, the man violently pulling her back in. You were telling me that it was just a mere domestic dispute. And the female officer, just like the dispatcher, spoke about this as if it was no big deal, a common occurrence. Part of me wondered if the laid-back attitude expected of Hawaii citizens had seeped into law enforcement, making them less reactive to what seemed like a serious crime. Part of me wondered if I had reacted dramatically, if my flu-induced delirium had exaggerated the situation. But a large part of me still wonders about this woman's safety. Domestic disputes have often become really violent, and people have died because of them. I could not help but wonder if more should have been done about it. Or maybe I thought that was just it. Maybe they were doing all that they could do, and just needed to disassociate themselves from any kind of emotion so that they could do their job without getting overwhelmed. Anyways, the police eventually left after that, their calm demeanor a stark contrast to my internal turmoil. My husband and I continued on our way. I did get over my flu, thankfully, and we really enjoyed the rest of the trip. The beaches were still beautiful, the food delicious. Months later, I still sometimes think about the incident. Even though it was, as the police said, just a simple dramatic domestic dispute, it was still absolutely frightening to see a woman trying to escape and then being pulled into a car like that. That is the kind of thing you see in nightmares, a chilling display of force and desperation. And I can only imagine the terror of being unable to escape from something that is terrorizing you, trapped with someone who is causing you such distress. Maybe they really were just having couples beef, a terrible argument played out in public. However, if it was more than that, if that was truly a kidnapping or a severe act of domestic violence, I really do hope she managed to get away and is somewhere safe now. I hope she has not become another tragic domestic violence statistic, a silent victim in a beautiful place. I just really hope that is not the case. The memory still gives me chills. During the summer of 2017, a group of about a dozen of my friends and peers decided to pitch in together to rent a house. It was a getaway to celebrate a birthday, a weekend escape from our usual routines. The house was in a basic residential area, located around a semi-rural lake near the small town of Shelton, Washington. It was a peaceful, quiet area, or so we thought. The house itself was fairly large, with a separate garage that had been converted into a living space. It had a few beds, and that night, myself and a few others decided to sleep in the garage. It offered a bit more privacy and a cooler temperature than the main house. The property was set up beautifully, with a large deck overlooking the lake and a little pier that extended out into the water. We spent the day by the lake, enjoying the sun and the calm water. After a pretty long day of cooking out, drinking, and playing some games, everyone was exhausted. It was then time to crash. Most of us were out cold, around 2 in the morning. With more people than there were beds, some were on couches and even on the floor in the living room, passed out from the day's activities. Folks had been drinking fairly heavily, so they were deep sleepers. Right around 3:30 in the morning, I woke up with an urgent need to go and use the bathroom. The garage did not have one, so I had to go to the main house. I fumbled in the dark, pulling on my pants over my pajamas. As I was getting dressed, I happened to glance out the window of the garage. Through the dim light of the distant street lamps, I noticed a long, diffuse shadow moving. It was the distinct outline of a person, walking slowly along the street outside the house. I did not really think too much of it at the time. My sleepy brain just figured it was probably somebody walking their dog, or maybe a neighbor going for an early morning stroll. It seemed innocent enough. I made the short walk across the gravel driveway, my house key in hand. When I reached the main house door, I tried the handle. To my surprise, the door was totally unlocked. I usually make sure everything is secure, but in the chaos of a large group, someone must have forgotten. A small fleeting thought passed through my mind about it being careless, but I dismissed it. I pushed the door open and went inside. To my surprise, I found one of my friends, a guy named Mark, sitting on the living room couch. He was checking his phone, looking thoroughly drunken and dazed after only a short amount of sleep. His eyes were wide, and he seemed very confused. He looked up at me. Weren't you just in here?" he asked, his voice thick with sleep and alcohol. I paused, baffled. "No," I told him. "I just woke up and came from the garage to use the bathroom." He blinked slowly. "Oh," he mumbled. "Is anyone else from the garage out of bed?" he asked. I said no, yet again. My buddy just shook it off, clearly still super confused and kind of amused by his own disorientation. I did my business in the bathroom, still a bit puzzled by Mark's question, and then returned back to the garage. This time, I made sure to firmly lock the door right behind me, double-checking the deadbolt. During the next morning, all of us were awake. We were gathered in the main space of the house, cooking some breakfast, the smell of bacon and coffee filling the air. The bright sunshine streamed through the windows, making the previous night's unease feel distant. Two of my other friends, who were a couple and had slept in one of the bedrooms in the main house, asked a peculiar question. They wanted to know if there were any open windows in the house last night. One of them was convinced that a cold draft had opened their bedroom door, which had been cracked slightly during the night. Their bedroom was at the back of the house, past at least 5 other people sleeping in the living room and 2 other bedrooms. It would have been quite a draft to affect their door. We checked. There was one open window in the kitchen, but no others in the house. So, I was not really sure about a draft being strong enough to affect their door. Then Mark, the guy I had spoken to during my bathroom trip, piped in. He asked the couple if they knew what time this strange draft or door opening had happened. They said, right around 3:30 in the morning. A sudden collective silence fell over the room. My mind immediately connected the dots. 3:30 in the morning. That was exactly when Mark thought he saw me walk through the house. And that was also precisely when I saw the long, diffuse shadow moving down the street outside. We all totally got chills when all of these details came to bear. It was a moment of dawning horror, a realization that something far more sinister than a draft or a confused friend might have been at play. It was right then that somebody else in the group brought up a recent local news report. Or maybe it was a Twitter or Facebook post they had seen. The post was about how somebody had reportedly been breaking into homes in the area. And they had reportedly been doing it for like months, a recurring pattern of intrusion. The description of the culprit was vague, but the idea was chilling. We never ended up reporting anything to the police, as we were not really sure that this is what had actually happened. It was all circumstantial, a collection of strange coincidences. We had no proof of theft or vandalism. However, turns out that the guy described in the local posts was later identified and caught. He was a pervert who just liked to break into homes and watch women sleep. The thought of it made my skin crawl even more. Now, all of these events could totally just be a coincidence. Perhaps the draft was strong, Mark was truly confused by his drunken state, and my sighting was just a normal person. But looking back, these years later, I am pretty convinced that our rental house was victimized by this creep. Nobody in our group was armed, and I am not even sure if there was even a security system in the rental house. Also, I am pretty fairly confident that I am not the one who left the door unlocked that night. I am usually very careful. That means someone else, someone unseen, might have been inside our rented house while we were all asleep and vulnerable. So yeah, it was a pretty damn creepy experience that still makes me shudder. The thought of a stranger watching us, or worse, moving among us as we slept, is a nightmare I cannot shake. I was about 5 to 6 months pregnant when this horrific series of events happened to me. For 9 years of my life, I had been working with car parts, selling components, and assisting customers at a local auto parts store. As a female in a predominantly male industry, you meet some pretty creepy characters. Many customers would initially ignore me, write out my presence, and insist on speaking to a man, as if women somehow do not know mechanics. That is just the South for you, I suppose. It was frustrating, but I was used to it. We had one regular customer who pretty much came in almost every single day. He was a backyard mechanic, which meant he would rig things together and always overcharge for the dumbest, simplest repairs. He was known for cutting corners. We called him Barefoot because, well, he always came in barefoot, no matter the weather. His feet were perpetually dirty. I have spoken to this man many times over the years. He always gave me really creepy vibes, the kind that made you think, do not leave your kids alone around him. There was just something unsettling in his gaze, a leer that made my skin crawl. One day, the phone rang, and I answered it. It was him, Barefoot. He had called in to see if his partner, another mechanic, had come into the store to pick up an order. No problem, a simple request. I put him on hold and went to check on the order. When I got back to the phone to tell him the order was in, I picked up the receiver and heard him talking to someone else on his end. Not wanting to be rude or interrupt, I just listened and waited for him to be done with his conversation. That is when he then said something that made me want to vomit. His voice was low, but clear enough for me to hear every word. He said that he could not wait to catch me alone. He then explicitly stated that he wanted to get my phone number, and that he also had intentions of me orally pleasing him to completion. He said it in a really nasty, graphic way, but I am sure you get the gist of it. I immediately hung up on him, my hand shaking. My heart started pounding in my chest. I walked straight to one of my bosses and told him exactly what I had heard, just in case Barefoot called back and complained about being hung up on. I was terrified, but of course, at that point, nothing could really be done. They said they would keep an eye on him, but no formal action was taken. I felt completely dismissed. Well, about 2 days later, he came into the store. I was walking out of the back room to the front counter when I saw him. He saw me at the same time. He then started to scream, loudly, for everyone in the store to hear, about how he liked my ass. At that point, I immediately turned around and went straight over to my main boss, the general manager. I told him what had just happened, what Barefoot had just shouted at me. But once again, they said nothing could be done. They told me that he was a customer, and unless he actually physically touched me or threatened me directly, their hands were tied. I was furious and felt completely unsupported. This sort of thing happened a few more times over the next couple of weeks. I once saw him actually creeping around my car in the parking lot, just standing there, looking it over. But since he did not do anything, once again, there was nothing my workplace claimed they could do. I was constantly on edge, feeling like I was being stalked even at work. After about 3 weeks of him just catcalling me, making crude remarks, and getting away with being a complete pervert, he then took it up a notch. One day, he came into the store and walked straight to where I was standing behind the counter, bypassing other employees. He started asking about car parts, pretending to be a normal customer. As I started to look up what he needed on the computer system, he suddenly grabbed my hand. His grip was surprisingly strong. He then leaned in very close, his breath hot against my ear, and whispered something chilling. "Look," he hissed, "I do not care if you want it. I am going to screw you." It did not immediately register to my mind what he had just said. My brain simply could not process such a vulgar, direct threat. I mean, who says things like that in a public place, at a place of business? It was unbelievable. As soon as his words sunk in, a wave of cold terror washed over me. I ripped my hand away from him and walked quickly to the back room of the store. I absolutely refused to come out until he was gone. I just stood there, shaking, waiting for him to leave. Now, I thought they could definitely do something about it. This was a clear threat, right? Nope. My district supervisor actually happened to be there that day, doing an inspection. I then explained to him exactly what was going on with the guy, every single incident, culminating in the whispered threat. His first question, after hearing all of this, was unbelievably, well, does he buy a lot around here? I honestly do not know why I never told my husband about any of this at the time. Perhaps it was embarrassment, or shame, or just the feeling that I had to handle it myself. But I felt like my place of employment was really failing me, abandoning me to this pervert, and I was genuinely scared for my safety and the safety of my unborn child. About 2 days after that terrifying encounter, I had finished my shift. I was walking outside to my car because I had forgotten my name tag inside. I needed to go back and get it before I left for the day. Guess who was waiting for me? Right on the side of the building, lurking in the shadows, was Barefoot. I barely saw him out of the corner of my eye before his hands were on me. He had yanked my arm so hard that I lost my balance and fell to the ground, hitting the concrete hard. Before I could even react, he pounced on me. He quickly covered my mouth with one hand, pressing down, while then fondling my breasts with the other. His face was inches from mine, twisted in a cruel, triumphant grin. He then spat out, his voice a venomous hiss. "I got you now." I was very pregnant and incredibly scared. All I could think of was trying not to freak out to the point that I went into premature labor right at that moment. My entire being was focused on protecting my baby. I just knew that the worst was about to happen, right in broad daylight, in the parking lot of my workplace. But then, by the grace of whatever power you believe in, one of my coworkers came out for a smoke break. She always went on the other side of the building to do her smoking, to be out of the way. But for whatever reason, on that particular day, she decided to switch it up and came out on my side of the building. I found out later that she was actually just checking on me because I was taking too long to leave, and she had a bad feeling. She then screamed at him. Her voice was high-pitched, full of shock and fear. It was enough. The unexpected noise, the sudden appearance of someone else, was enough to get him to run off. He scrambled up, hopped into a car that he had parked right next to mine, and then peeled out of the parking lot, speeding away. I would really like to say that my place of employment was really great. I would like to say that they immediately sent me to the doctor to get checked out after an employee was physically assaulted on their property. But they did not. They said that all they could do was just to tell the guy not to come back to the store. No police report, no medical attention, just a ban from the store. I am not ashamed to say that I actually cried for hours after this incident. I was shaking, traumatized, and utterly heartbroken by the lack of support. But let us be honest, who would not be? I was lucky, so incredibly lucky, but I felt utterly abandoned. I am 21 years old now, but this happened to me when I was 17, during my high school years. Back then, I always walked to and from school. I did not take the bus because, well, I was bullied a lot, so I did not really have any other transportation options. The walk was my only way to get there and back, a quiet journey through the neighborhood. One ordinary day, I was walking to school, minding my own business, when this white van suddenly pulled off to the side of the road, right next to me. It slowed to a stop, its engine idling. A guy who looked about his late 30s then rolled down his passenger side window. "Hey," he called out, his voice smooth. "Do you need a ride? I know that you are in the 11th grade, and that you go to that school over there." I was instantly confused and a little unnerved. How did he know where I went to school? And especially, how did he know what grade I was in? It was specific information that a stranger should not have known about me. A cold feeling settled in my stomach. I told the man, no thanks, trying to sound polite but firm. I kept walking, increasing my pace slightly, hoping he would just drive away. He did. After that, He never appeared again for a while, and I thought that was the end of it. Then, about a week later, it happened again. I was coming back from school this time. It had started to rain, a light drizzle at first, but it was getting heavier. I was hurrying, hoping to get home before I got completely soaked. As I was walking home, once again, the same white van pulled over right next to me. It seemed to materialize out of nowhere. And once again, the same guy leaned over and asked if I needed a ride, his voice just as calm and inviting as before. I told him, no thanks. Again, my voice was a little more strained this time. I quickened my steps, trying to reject an air of confidence I did not feel, and just kept walking. I could feel his eyes on me. As I was walking away, my heart starting to pound, I then heard a car door open, then slam shut with a heavy thud. My blood ran cold. I immediately turned around. The guy was out of his vehicle, standing on the sidewalk, and was starting to walk towards me. His pace was slow, deliberate. I could not really do anything other than just stare at him, frozen in fear. My mind raced, trying to figure out an escape, but I felt completely exposed. He was closing the distance. Right at that terrifying moment, I heard a familiar voice. It was an old neighbor of ours, Mr. Harrison, who lived just a few houses down. He was in his front yard, working in his garden, which was unusual for that time of day. "Oh, hey, Ashley," he called out, his voice friendly and loud. "Can you help me with something in the garden? Also, why did you not show up at work yesterday?" I knew at that exact moment what he was doing. He was not genuinely asking for help or questioning my work attendance. He was creating a diversion, making it seem like I was expected, like I was not alone. It was a brilliant, quick-thinking move. I immediately started to walk towards him, relief flooding through me. And with that, the guy from the white van stopped. He looked at Mr. Harrison, then at me. His expression was unreadable. Then he turned, got back into his car, and then left, like nothing ever happened. He just drove away, leaving me to my bewildered relief. I thanked the old man profusely for helping me out, my voice still a little shaky. He just smiled and said, "Anytime, dear." Soon after, I arrived safely at my house, the terrifying encounter still fresh in my mind. The very next day, I was watching the local news report with my mom, and I actually saw that very same guy. The news reported that he had been arrested for attacking and stalking other teenage girls in the area. They showed his mugshot, and it was undeniably him. I was in complete shock when I saw the guy in the photo. My blood ran cold. It hit me just how close I had come to being another one of his victims. I immediately told my mom about it, every detail of my encounters with him. She was horrified, her face turning pale. But since the police had already caught the guy, there was nothing else we could really do about it. The immediate danger was gone, but the fear lingered. After all that happened, my mom started to take me to school pretty much every day, and always made sure to pick me up as well. She did not want me walking alone ever again. I sometimes still wonder, though, what would have happened if that old man, Mr. Harrison, had not been there? What if he had not seen me, or had not thought to intervene? It is really scary to think about, and it is a thought that will always stay with me. His quick thinking possibly saved my life. About 8 months ago, my apartment complex experienced a series of unsettling break-ins. It was a worrying time for everyone living there. I usually never have my door locked, mainly because they are old manual locks, and honestly, I just always seem to forget. Stupid, I know, but it was a habit I had developed over time. Well, one day as I got home from work, pulling into my usual parking spot, I had saw a large, dark-colored van. It was parked right next to me, and its side door was wide open, as if someone had just left it ajar in a hurry. A man suddenly came down the sidewalk towards me. He looked a little rough, and his eyes seemed to scan the area constantly. He stopped near the van and then asked, "Is this your van?" I just kind of shook my head, a little confused, and told him I did not know whose it was. It was not a vehicle I recognized from the complex. He looked at the van, then back at me. "Well," he said, his voice low, It is definitely not a good idea to leave your cars unlocked or open with what has been happening lately. He was referring to the recent break-ins. He then turned to walk away, his figure disappearing into the twilight, and just told me to stay safe. His words were odd, almost a warning, but also a little unsettling coming from him. Fast forward to about 12 in the morning, a few nights later. I was getting ready for bed when I realized my dogs needed to go outside one last time before we settled down for the night. I told our roommate, who was still awake in the living room, that the dogs needed to go out and I would be right back. I walked behind the apartment building to where the doggy bag station was, a small pole with bags and a trash can. It was right across the yard, illuminated by a single flickering streetlight. As I approached, I could see a black figure standing underneath that streetlight. It was completely still, just staring at me. My dogs, usually friendly and oblivious, had started to growl. It was a low, guttural sound from deep in their throats. They then just started eyeing him. Their hackles raised slightly, sensing something was wrong. Their usually playful demeanor had vanished. A chill ran down my spine. I quickly scooped up the dog waste, my eyes still on the figure. As I turned to go back towards the apartment, the figure also turned, mirroring my movement. I walked around to the front of the apartment building, trying to get to my door quickly. To my horror, I then saw the figure up front as well, just a little bit closer this time. He had moved incredibly fast, almost silently. It was now that I was starting to get a little more than concerned. I was outright terrified. This was not a coincidence. This was not a neighbor. As I started walking quickly toward my apartment door, he did the same, walking directly in my direction, closing the distance between us. I stopped dead in my tracks, my breath catching. He stopped too, perfectly mirroring me. He was playing a terrifying game. Then, as if by some divine intervention, my neighbor, Mr. Henderson, came downstairs from his apartment. He was on his way to work, wearing his uniform, heading out for his night shift. He saw me standing there, looking panicked. "Hey there," he said, giving me a friendly nod. "Have a good night." I quickly replied, trying to sound normal despite my racing heart. "You too, Mr. Henderson." I used this conversation, this unexpected shield, to my advantage. While he was talking, I quickly made my way the last few steps upstairs to my apartment door. I fumbled with my keys, unlocked it, then ran inside as fast as I could and slammed the door shut, locking it immediately. I heard the solid click of the deadbolt engaging. My roommate was still out for the night, so I was alone with my dogs. I was too shaken to go to my bedroom, so I just decided to sleep on the couch in the living room, keeping the lights on. I tried to calm myself by watching television, but my mind was racing. I had only been watching for about an hour, perhaps just starting to relax, when I then heard a sound that sent pure ice through my veins. My front door handle started to be jiggled around. Someone was trying to get in. That is when my dogs then started going absolutely insane. Their barks were deafening, a frantic, furious chorus. Then suddenly, with a heavy, jarring impact, I then saw a black figure. It hurled itself down the stairs right outside my apartment door. It made such a loud, heavy thump that it actually shook the entire apartment building. The vibrations ran through the floor beneath me. I watched him. He looked around really quickly, his head darting back and forth, as if disoriented or looking for something. And as he looked directly at my apartment door, his face caught the dim light from the hallway. That is when I realized, with a sickening lurch in my stomach, that it was the very same man who had asked me about the van previously. The man who had cryptically warned me to stay safe. I constantly wonder what would have happened if I had not been in the living room when I was awake and alert. What if I had been asleep in my bedroom, unaware of the struggle at the door? Or if my neighbor had not come down the stairs at that exact moment, providing me with the opportunity to escape inside. It is really creepy to think about, a chilling what-if scenario that haunts my thoughts. I changed my habits after that. Every single night, the door is locked and the chain is on. I do not forget anymore. The memory of that figure trying to get in and the heavy thud as he jumped. is a permanent reminder of how vulnerable we can be. Here is a little bit of backstory before I begin. This story happened when I was around 22 years old. For perspective, I am a female who had been in the same relationship for about 2 years. It was a secret relationship, an affair with my boss. He was much older than me, around 37 years old. To be honest, I was really starting to get bored of the relationship. He did not have much of a libido, and our intimate life had dwindled to almost nothing. Now, I am a very adventurous and sexual person, and I started to realize that I would not be happy staying with him, since our love life had pretty much fallen right down the crapper. I still felt like I loved him, in a way, but I was always really curious about what I was missing out on, about other experiences, other connections. He often worked mornings, and I worked nights, so there was only about a 2-hour overlap where I would see him at work. Other than that, he was almost always asleep by the time I got home from my shift. I had seriously started to lack the kind of love and affection that I would require to continue on with that relationship. I also really enjoyed going out to bars and socializing with people of all ages. This was especially true since I was getting no type of excitement or adventure at home. It was a way to feel alive, to connect. Now, I have never told anyone about this experience, not a single soul, because I know if any of my family knew about it, they would probably be pretty upset. My father is a sheriff, a law enforcement officer, and I know that they would highly disapprove of my decisions, especially my decision to go out alone. My mother has never been a fan of me going out to bars, and she has always warned me about not leaving with people that I did not know. But since I was getting so bored with my life, so desperate for something new, I said, screw it, and I just did what I wanted. I craved excitement. I still think about this experience a lot, even now, years later, and it really makes me glad that I'm able to share my story. Knowing what all of the outcomes could have been fills me with a chilling gratitude. Now that all of that is out of the way, here is the story. One night, after a really long shift, I went straight to a local bar to have a couple of beers and socialize. I oddly really love going to bars by myself for a lot of reasons. Mostly, I just know how to take care of myself, and I like making my own decisions on things, choosing my own path without influence. So, I was sitting there at the bar by myself, just sipping a beer and staring at my phone, casually scrolling. I would almost always acquire company, even if I went by myself. Being a young girl in my 20s with long blonde hair and generally being pretty friendly, people tended to approach me. The bar was not empty though. I noticed that there was some kind of company get-together happening, mostly comprised of adult men, right behind me. They seemed to be drinking and having a good time, their voices loud with laughter. I did not associate myself with the group and just sat there, drinking my beer and minding my own business on my phone. All of a sudden, there was a rather large man, maybe in his 40s, sitting next to me. He tried to start up a conversation, his voice a little gruff, but friendly. I would not have considered him attractive by any means, but I'm not the one to shoot down a conversation with a stranger, just for that reason alone. I believe in being polite. He was asking me all of the basic, usual questions you get at a bar. He seemed friendly enough, just making small talk. He also had a friend with him, a man who looked a little younger and, I must admit, more attractive than the first man. This second man came up behind him and also engaged in conversation with us. All three of us conversed for a while, and it was pretty obvious that they were involved with the company party happening behind me. They were clearly colleagues. I thought the men were nice enough, but I still tried to pick up on people's intentions. I tried to keep that cautious awareness in mind, always. Both of the men, after a while, tried to get me to leave the bar with them. They invited me to come back to their hotel. Even though I was flattered, I politely turned down their proposal. I told them that I was in a relationship and that I really was not interested in anything more than just friendly conversation. They seemed to accept this, saying it was okay, and still continued to talk to me. Then they went on to tell me that they were actually staying at a hotel nearby. They mentioned that if I was willing to go with them, they had some dabs back at their hotel room that they were willing to share. Dabs are a very strong form of concentrated cannabis. I was very aware of the dangers of going with strangers to a hotel room. I denied them multiple times, shaking my head and reiterating that I was not interested in that kind of situation. Now, I am not going to lie, I am what you might call a stoner chick, and I love getting high, but not with strangers, so late at night while I was alone. That was a firm boundary for me. They were really persistent though, their voices soft but insistent. Being the young, ignorant girl that I was, craving that adventure and excitement, I eventually decided I would be adventurous. I decided to just try and go with them just for the dabs. That is when I told them very clearly that I was only interested in the dabs. I emphasized that I would go with them, but I was absolutely not going to be sleeping with either of them. I wanted to make my intentions crystal clear. They both said they understood, and they seemed very excited that I had finally caved and agreed to go with them, even with my conditions. So, we packed up all of our stuff, finished our drinks, and started leaving the bar. As we were walking out, one of their co-workers, a scruffy-looking guy, actually tried to come running after us. He was asking if he could tag along, his voice hopeful. Both of the men with me immediately told him no, very firmly, and that he would have to stay behind. The man who was trying to come then became bitter and angry. He yelled out after us as we left the bar, his voice dripping with malice. "All right, but you better send me pictures." Right then and there, a sudden, profoundly bad feeling washed over me. It was like a cold shiver down my spine, a wave of dread. I could hear both of the men with me chuckling, a low, secretive sound as they continued walking with me, seemingly oblivious to my sudden shift in mood. I then stated for a second time, very clearly, my voice a little louder and firmer than before, that I was not going to be sleeping with either of them. To which they both just said they knew, their faces still holding those unsettling smiles. I started to feel like I was making a really bad decision. My instincts were screaming at me to turn around, to run back into the bar, to find a taxi, but I just continued on. I have no idea why. Maybe it was because I had already committed to going, or maybe it was because I was already out on the dark street with two very large men that I did not know. I felt trapped by my own choices. We walked to the hotel, a nondescript building a few blocks from the bar. My feeling of discomfort started to swell up inside of me, growing with every step. We did not say much while we walked, the silence between us heavy and unnerving. We made it to the hotel entrance and stepped into the elevator. As the doors closed, 100 different terrifying thoughts then started to run through my mind. I had started to think about all the different outcomes of how the situation was going to play out, all the horrible scenarios. I started to panic, afraid of what would happen if I all of a sudden decided to make a run for it. Would they stop me? Would they turn violent? We had walked down the hallways. The carpet muffled our steps, right toward their room. As we walked, I noticed them glancing at each other, subtle looks exchanged that I could not decipher. My internal questions spiraled. What am I doing? What am I thinking? Where are they going to find my body? All of these questions, and even more, were running through my mind, a frantic, desperate internal monologue. I could not help but imagine going into their room and having it all be set up like an episode of some crime show, like Dexter, a dark, hidden torture chamber. But when we arrived at the room, it was totally normal. It was just a standard hotel room, messy with clothes and bags, but nothing sinister. The first guy, who for the sake of the story, let us call him Jack, sat at the desk and dug out a backpack from under the table. He then started pulling out his dab equipment, a small torch and glass rig. But I noticed the other guy, the more slender and sketchier one, who we will call Frank, seemed very fidgety. He stood next to one of the beds, just watching me with an unsettling intensity. I am not going to lie, I felt incredibly uncomfortable. But being the quiet, soft-spoken person that I was, especially when feeling threatened, I just stood there and said nothing. I decided to take a position next to the desk, leaning against the wall, trying to create a bit of distance from Frank. We were having a pretty normal conversation, mostly about the dabs and their work. I had already been given around 4 dabs and was feeling pretty high, my thoughts a little fuzzy and slow. I had started to notice that Frank was inching closer and closer to me, slowly closing the distance. That is when the content of our conversation then started to take a completely different turn. Jack seemed pretty laid back, just taking dabs and chatting, but Frank was getting closer and closer by the minute, his body language becoming more aggressive. They tried talking to me about my boyfriend. They asked me if I was happy with him. No, I had no intention on cheating on him. I had never cheated on any of my boyfriends throughout my whole life. I definitely was not going to start now, especially not in this situation. They had started asking me if I was happy in my relationship, if I was bored, and then, more disturbingly, what I liked to do sexually. They then began talking about what they liked to do sexually. I was incredibly uncomfortable, my body tensing. Frank was all of a sudden right next to me, his arm leaning against the wall, just inches above my head, effectively trapping me. I started stuttering, my mind a jumble. I could not think straight. I was afraid to tell him to back off, in fear of creating an even more uncomfortable, potentially violent situation. My heart was pounding so fast that all I could think about was getting overpowered and then taken advantage of. The fear was paralyzing. I then started saying, my voice shaky, that I should probably go home now, trying to make an exit. But they both just started asking me more questions about why I was in such an unsatisfying relationship, pressing me. All I could think about was how I was going to get out of this crazy situation. I cannot really remember all the different things that they made me talk about, the bizarre conversations, but I was very unnerved. Jack could tell that I was not feeling good about things, finally, and ended up telling Frank to back off a little. Frank took a couple of steps back and then went silent for a few moments, still watching me. Then Frank asked me, his voice low and predatory, if I wanted him to go down on me. Instantly, I felt absolutely infuriated. My fear morphed into a burning anger. I said that I wanted to go home immediately, my voice firm. Jack stood up then, and both of them just stared right at me. I knew that whatever was going to happen was about to happen. I braced myself for anything, ready to fight, to scream, to do whatever I had to. Jack then stood directly in front of the door, blocking my exit. They both just looked at me, their faces unreadable. Jack then said, his voice even, "You can leave, but only if you tell us you do not want us to go down on you." It was a twisted, humiliating demand, forcing me to verbalize my refusal. I felt my blood run cold. Both of my hands then formed into tight fists, and I straightened my arms out at both sides, preparing myself. I felt like I almost yelled the words, and I think I startled the both of them with the intensity of my voice. "Look," I practically shouted, "I do not want you to go down on me." Right after that, I made my way to the door. I walked over towards Jack, who was over 3 times my size, and stared him directly in the eye. I think then and there, they both saw how serious and angry I was. My refusal was clear, my eyes burning. Jack stood off to the side, shifting slightly, and he finally let me through the door. I was waiting for one of them to grab me, to pull me back, but it never happened. I was then outside the door, in the silent hallway, and it closed behind me with a soft click. I decided to run. I ran down that hotel hallway, probably about 2 in the morning, as fast as my legs could carry me. Besides standing in the elevator, where I was forced to wait for what felt like an eternity, I ran all the way to my car. I jumped inside of it, locked the doors, and drove home, fighting back tears along the way. My body was shaking, but my mind was clear. I snuck into my house. My boyfriend was passed out in bed, oblivious. I laid down next to him and pretty much just laid there for hours, just staring at my ceiling with wide eyes, replaying every moment of the terrifying encounter. I never told my boyfriend about my experience that night. I could not bring myself to do it. The story deeply affected me. I cannot help but thinking that because of my decisions to do something dumb and try to have a good time, I put myself in apparent danger. I learned a brutal lesson about trust and boundaries, and I have always been very careful ever since. This story is for anyone who thinks that nothing bad can happen to them, for anyone who thinks they are invincible. And even though my story could have turned out differently, in a much more horrific way, the thought of "it cannot happen to me" has been the downfall for many people. And I will not soon forget the terror I felt. Please, everyone, just be careful out there. Be aware. Trust your instincts. I am mostly a lurker here, a silent observer of others' experiences, but I've considered sharing my story several times. It has taken me a long time to get to this point, to feel ready to finally speak about it. I was really hesitant, because absolutely no one knows about this. Not my family, not my closest friends. I have held on to this secret, this chilling experience, for about 10 years now. But I have figured it is time to let it out, to tell my truth. Plus, I think there are some really valuable lessons that can be learned from my experience. So, here we go. For reference, I am a 27-year-old woman now, and this story takes place about 10 years ago, when I was 17. I had just started university, a huge, exciting step in my life. I was really excited about having a fresh new start. I had always been a really nerdy outcast in high school, awkward and shy. I had never had a boyfriend before, and I had never even been on a proper date. So, I was incredibly naive, and perhaps overly optimistic, about boys and relationships. My introverted and awkward personality had not magically changed since entering university, so it is safe to say that I did not really meet any interesting or approachable guys at school. I was still mostly alone, focused on my studies. One late night, I was in my room, diligently working on an assignment on my laptop. The room was quiet, lit only by the glow of my screen. Suddenly, I received a new request on MSN Messenger. For those who might not know, this was a popular instant messaging platform back then. The email address of the person who sent the request was a boy's name, followed by some numbers. The name was clearly ethnic, and it immediately struck me that it was likely someone of the same origin as me. I felt a strange sense of intrigue, a curiosity. I thought, why not? So, I accepted the request. For the sake of this story, we will call this boy Ken. We got it chatting right away. The first thing I asked him was how he had gotten my email address. It was not a common thing for strangers to just add each other. He dodged the question. He gave some vague answer, something about a mutual friend, but he did not elaborate. And stupidly, I just let it go, not really thinking too much of it at the time. This was from the time when it was pretty normal to accept anyone and everyone as a friend on social media platforms like Facebook. A more innocent, or perhaps more naive, time. As Ken and I continued to talk over the next few days, I learned more about him. He lived in my city, which was a relief, and apparently was not much older than me, just a year or two. As I had guessed, our roots were, in fact, in the same country, India. He seemed kind, funny, and intelligent. He asked me why I did not have a picture of myself on my display picture, implying he wanted to see me. This prompted him to suggest that we turn on our webcams because, he said, he wanted to see me too. My heart fluttered with a mix of excitement and nervousness. I declined at first, feeling shy, but he just kept insisting, gently but persistently. Somehow, he managed to convince me. And then, we both switched on our webcams. I was pleasantly surprised, and somewhat relieved, to see that Ken was a really good-looking young guy. He seemed to be chatting to me from the comfort of his bedroom, which looked completely normal. He had a warm, genuine smile. He seemed very normal, and my initial apprehension began to fade. Our MSN chats then carried on for a couple of weeks. They developed into text messages, which felt more personal, and we even had a few phone calls after I had agreed to give him my number. By this point, I had started to develop a crush on Ken. He seemed like everything I had been looking for, a kind, good-looking guy who was actually interested in me. He asked me to go out with him a couple of times, but I was always really busy with school. Our schedules just never seemed to line up. But finally, we found one afternoon when we were both free, and we decided to schedule a lunch date. Ken had a car, which was a big deal. and he offered to pick me up from university after I was done for the day. I spent a long time getting ready. I was a little too dressed up for my C+ programming class, but I felt just right for the lunch date we planned. We were going to a local vegetarian restaurant, a place I had always wanted to try. Stupidly enough, I did not tell any of my friends where I was going or with whom. I was just really embarrassed about going on my very first date, especially at almost 18, with someone who had randomly added me on MSN. It felt like something I should keep private, a secret. I waited outside my building, feeling a mix of giddy excitement and nervous anticipation. A black car with heavily tinted windows pulled up silently beside me. My heart skipped a beat. The passenger side window rolled down slowly, revealing the driver. And sure enough, there was Ken, sitting in the driver's seat. He looked exactly like his webcam, maybe even better. I was happy to see that he was as cute in person as he was on webcam. However, what I was not expecting, what hit me immediately, was the intense smell of weed floating out of the car. It was thick, cloying, almost overwhelming. It was not really relevant to my safety, perhaps, but it was certainly part of that first impression, and it immediately made me feel a little uneasy. I was really concerned that he might be driving high. He unlocked the doors and motioned for me to get in, and so I did, without dispute, without a second thought. I just climbed in. As I sat down in the passenger seat, my nerves still jangling, he immediately put his hand right on my thigh. It was a firm, possessive touch. My eyes widened. I very nervously then shifted my leg away, trying to subtly move his hand without being too obvious or rude. So, I started, trying to break the silence and the awkwardness. "Do you know where the restaurant is? I can guide you if you want." I tried to keep my voice light, casual. He smirked at me, a strange, knowing look that sent a shiver down my spine. But he did not really say anything in response. He just started driving. Okay, I thought, that is kind of weird. Maybe he was nervous or just as awkward as I was, both of which I would sympathize with. So, I just let it be. I was about to try my hand at a little small talk, which I am really no good at to begin with, when I then noticed him heading right towards the highway ramp. My stomach clenched. I started to worry, a cold dread creeping in. The restaurant was not that far from my campus, just a few minutes' drive. There was really no reason for us to be getting on the highway. I said, my voice barely a whisper. "You do not need to take the highway. The restaurant is really close by. I can guide you." I tried to keep my voice steady, but I could hear my own nervousness, my fear, seeping into every word. Ken finally spoke, his voice low and smooth, for the first time since I had gotten into the car. "I thought that maybe we could just go to my place instead," he said, his eyes still fixed on the road, not looking at me. "We can play Need for Speed, and I can make lunch for you." My mind raced, utterly frantic. I was 17 years old, on my way to the house of a guy that I had just met for the very first time. I had not told anyone where I was going. My mind was reeling with all the implications. I knew, with absolute certainty, that this would be an utterly stupid thing to do. Despite the clear red flags waving furiously in my face, despite every alarm bell screaming in my head, I had decided that I did not want to ruin our first date. I did not want to be rude. I had told him earlier that I liked playing Need for Speed. So, like an idiot, a truly naive and foolish idiot, I reluctantly agreed, just to avoid being rude. We made it to his house. It was a modest place, apparently his family's home, but it was situated in a sort of shady neighborhood, a place I had never felt comfortable in. We stepped inside, and of course, no one except us was home. The house was sparsely furnished, eerily quiet, and looked unkempt, almost neglected. It struck me as pretty odd for a family home. He informed me that his Xbox was in his bedroom. My stomach churned. I hesitated in the doorway of his room, my heart pounding. But he sat at the foot of his bed, directly in front of a television, and then patted the empty space beside him for me to have a seat. There was literally nowhere else to sit in his room, not a chair, not a beanbag. So, with extreme caution, I sat down, keeping as much distance as I possibly could between us, my body rigid with apprehension. As we played Need for Speed, munching on the peanut butter and jelly sandwiches he made, I started to relax, just a little. The game was a familiar distraction, and the sandwiches tasted normal. I was about to laugh at myself for being overly paranoid, for imagining things, when Ken then did something truly bizarre. He got up onto the bed. Then, he sat down directly behind me, his legs on the other side of my body, effectively trapping me between him and the headboard. My blood ran cold. He tried to guide my hands on the controller, leaning over me. My body stiffened. I had started to ask him what he was doing, my voice trembling. And as if this was not uncomfortable enough, his hands then moved from the controller and slid up under my shirt. My breath caught in my throat. That is when I really started to panic, a raw, primal fear erupting within me. I thought, with a sickening certainty, that he was going to try and grope my chest. But instead, his hands moved lower. He then started squeezing and actually massaging my belly. I was more than a little chubby back then, so you can imagine what that might have been like. It was a repulsive, violating sensation. I dropped the controller in pure shock, the plastic clattering loudly on the floor. I quickly stood up, pulling away from him, my body recoiling. My hands immediately went to fix my shirt, pulling it down, trying to cover myself. I was at a total loss for words, my mind blank with disgust and horror. And he did nothing but then smirk at me, a smug, unsettling smile spreading across his face, and tell me that he liked it. The words were a vile confirmation of his intent. I felt completely disgusted and totally violated. I had had enough. More than enough. I lied. My voice, though shaky, was firm. I told him that I had a group project that I really needed to work on, and that I needed to go immediately. He asked where I lived so that he could drop me home. Thankfully, in that moment of terror, I had the common sense not to tell him that. I asked him to drop me off at school instead, where I would be supposedly meeting up with my classmates for the project. He obliged, driving me back to campus in silence. After our very uncomfortable, utterly terrifying first date, I decided that I did not want to talk to Ken anymore. My crush had evaporated, replaced by a deep-seated revulsion. I did not outright block him on MSN or on my phone, our only two methods of communication at the time. But I rarely responded to any of his messages, and I always ignored his calls. I just tried to phase him out of my life, hoping he would get the message. One night, several weeks later, he messaged me on MSN around 11 at night, asking me to come over. He told me that he would send a cab to bring me over to his place. I was thoroughly annoyed, and my fear morphed into cold anger. I then responded, my words sharp. What do you take me for? Why do you even think I would want to do that? He replied almost immediately, with a disturbing casualness, saying, no sex, I promise. It was just bizarre, disgusting, and chilling. I did not even respond. I just closed the chat. He continued trying to get in touch with me for months after that, persistent and unrelenting, but I continued to ignore him. And then, suddenly, he vanished. The messages stopped. The calls ceased. I figured that he had finally gotten the point. I thought, and wished, the story ended here. But it does not. I last heard from Ken in late February of the following year. He had stopped trying to contact me shortly after Valentine's Day. In April of that same year, 2 family members and I went on holiday to visit another relative. We will call her Anne. She was living in the Caribbean at the time, and I loved her dearly. Anne was, and still is, a bit of an eccentric. She considers herself very spiritual and is an active member of a large, well-known spiritual organization. She is deeply connected with India and always goes back for frequent visits, finding peace and purpose there. While we stayed with her in the Caribbean, she had told us about her most recent spiritual trip to India. While there, she met a really wealthy and well-connected local woman through the organization. This woman quickly became a very close friend of Anne's. Let us call her Connie. During our visit, Anne introduced us to Connie virtually over Skype, because Connie lives in India. We chatted with her a couple of times throughout our vacation through Skype, getting to know her a little bit. She seemed kind, wise, and very charismatic. Little did we know back then that Connie, whom Anne had spontaneously met halfway across the world in India, would soon wreak utter havoc on our lives. Now, that is a story that I am just not, and may never be, ready to tell because of how many lives were affected by it and the sheer severity of the damage that had been inflicted. What you need to know is that Connie was an outright criminal and a con artist. She had been targeting our family long before Anne had actually met her. Their meeting was no coincidence. It was a meticulously planned, sinister plot. Not only did she manage to steal over $100,000 from our family, but she took any peace of mind or sense of security that we ever had. When we had finally caught on to her scheme and confronted her, she insisted that we were mistaken, tried to manipulate us again, but then disappeared into thin air once we forced her out of our lives. You are probably wondering what on earth this has to do with the story about Ken. Well, get this. The situation with Connie lasted many, many months. The whole thing is kind of a blur to me now, a hazy nightmare. But we first spoke to her online in April, and I remember the whole ordeal lasting well into the fall. While she normally resided in India, Anne had innocently invited her to visit and stay with us, where we presently live. That is where things really took a turn for the worse. Her physical presence in our home amplified the fear and manipulation. Some of the things I clearly remember, and which are important to this story, were two very specific incidents. One, the whole time she was staying with us, she was constantly trying to convince me to transfer schools. Not just any school, but a very obscure school and program in the United States, far away from my home. She was actually getting very pushy about it, almost demanding it. And two, she asked me if I was a virgin. When I hesitated, uncomfortable, she then bluntly told me to save myself from my husband, emphasizing the importance of purity. Really disturbing, I know. Even more so now that I look back. During this time, I was so emotionally drained and stressed from Connie's presence and her ongoing scam that I did not really think of anything but the immediate situation at hand. My mind was consumed. In fact, I had stopped socializing almost entirely and even started frequently skipping classes. I had lost contact with my high school friends, and my university friends were way too new to really care or notice my strange behavior. So my strange behavior and new destructive habits went completely unnoticed by anyone who cared. I was isolated, vulnerable. Fast forward to one day after Connie's final disappearance in the fall. We thought she was gone for good. I was at home with my dad when my cell phone rang. I looked at the caller ID, and it was a number I did not have saved. So, it was showing the contact information as whatever name the phone was registered under. My heart then dropped right into my stomach. My phone displayed the name. The first name was a man's name, but the last name was the exact same last name as Connie's. I started to panic, a cold wave of dread washing over me. I ran into my bedroom, my heart pounding, to answer the call in private. I had no idea what to expect when I picked up the phone. My voice was a trembling whisper as I answered. I was then greeted by a familiar voice. It was Ken. My stomach churned. I honestly thought I was going to puke. In that instant, a sudden, horrifying realization crashed over me. He had actually been a part of this whole sick plot. Of course, I did not have any hard evidence to prove that he was connected to Connie. But let me explain. The timing of his appearance and his reappearance into my life. The shared last name on the phone. And the fact that he had contacted me out of the blue after months of silence, and I had no idea why or how he even got this new number. It was all just way too bizarre to be a mere coincidence. It was a meticulously planned operation. Of course, I totally freaked out at Ken when he called. My fear finally erupted into raw anger. I told him that if he ever called me again, I would call the police. I would report him for harassment. His response back was just a really weird, dry half laugh. And then he said, in the most creepy, sinister voice you can think of, "Well, okay then." Then he hung up. I just knew in my gut this was their last desperate attempt to get back in touch, to somehow slither their way back into mine and my family's lives. Thankfully, though, I had never heard from Ken again after that day. The phone remained silent. A while after this all happened, a few months later, I was having a conversation with a family member who was really closely involved in all of this. We were talking about the whole ordeal with Connie, trying to piece it all together. And she told me something that solidified my horrifying realization. She said that she sensed something extremely wrong, a deep unease, when Connie was pushing so hard to have me sent off to that obscure school in the United States. My family member had an unshakable feeling that Connie was involved in some sort of human trafficking scene. She said that if I had left for that school, she would never see me again. Right at that time, as she spoke those words, was when the horrifying pieces finally came together for me. I was just too damn naive to have seen it before. The memories totally flooded back to me when I heard that. Al Ken had told me, no sex, I promise, when he invited me over to his house. How canny was, at the same time, telling me to remain a virgin, to save myself from marriage. The puzzle clicked into place chillingly. It was all connected. As I said, I had never told a soul about Ken, nor about that weird virginity conversation with Connie. I had kept it buried, too embarrassed, too scared to reveal the truth. But now, I strongly and firmly believed that Ken had been some sort of player in Connie's twisted game. He was there, I now realized, to keep me away from other guys, to prevent me from having a boyfriend, to keep me isolated and vulnerable, prime for whatever sinister plans they had for me. For those who may be wondering, we never called the police on Connie or Ken for their larger scheme. It is difficult to explain, but nothing really illegal had happened at face value. It was all manipulation, coercion, and subtle threats, impossible to prove to authorities. It is very hard to explain, a web of psychological abuse that left no tangible evidence. I will also mention that I tried to find Ken online many times after this all happened. I do not know why. I just felt like I wanted to expose him or call him out, to bring him to justice. But I was not able to find even a sliver of information on him. Not by the name Ken, nor by the name that had appeared on the caller ID. It was as if he did not even exist. He was a ghost. Also, I am really awful at directions, and I did not remember his address or where his house was exactly, beyond the shady neighborhood. It was all a blur of terror. I am sorry if this story is convoluted or confusing. I am trying to get my point across without giving out any names or too many details, which makes it a little challenging to weave everything together. I hope this can serve as a powerful warning to young people. Never trust anyone blindly, especially those you meet online. Do your thorough background checks on people. Always be very aware of and weary of people's true intentions, no matter how charming they seem. Also, from this incident onward, I just really cannot stomach a lot of these spiritual organizations. I never liked the idea of them to begin with, but now I see them as fertile ground for predators. No judgment for those who are into that sort of thing, but it is just definitely not for me. Stay safe, everyone. And to Ken and Connie, if I ever see either of you ever again, I will definitely kick you in the face. Rot in hell.